I love how this is a bipartisan issue, and I think that's so important. So my question's two-part in the notion that it's bipartisan. One is conservatives. We talk a lot about the sanctity of life. We talk about traditional family values. Talk about religious freedom. I don't see a lot of conservative leaders talking about the threat that pornography plays. So question one is, what does the conservative movement need to do to get more comfortable talking about this issue? Question number two is, what does the Me Too movement need to do to start taking on some of these issues too? Because I don't see it from the left side really as aggressively. I mean, the Me Too movement brought about the focus on sexual harassment, predators, and that type of thing. But with so much violence happening in pornography, why hasn't the Me Too movement stepped up on this? So both sides. What do conservatives need to do? What do
Thank you.
liberals need to do?
I think conservatives need to really understand, and I have actually just said this at the meeting that you and I were just at, of conservative leaders, thought leaders around the country, that I would like to see conservatives spend as much time and resources on protecting children and their dignity once they're born as they do for the preborn. This is a huge issue, right? So just because they get born doesn't mean they're safe. And in particular, some of the most vulnerable children are from broken families and the foster care system. Many of those foster care kids graduate out of foster care and end up on the streets and being trafficked. All right, but it's not just those at-risk kids, I would say. I've heard of so many stories of kids from Christian homes that have been trafficked. They've been in their high school, their boyfriend. These traffickers have groomers inside the schools that are young men and boys. And they'll build relationships with these girls and get them into, you know, a lot of sex stuff, a lot of group stuff and everything else, and then end up drawing them away from their family, isolating them, and out on the streets. It's hard to believe, but there's such a manipulation that goes on in this grooming process. So I would say, you know, spend the kind of time and effort to protect kids and to recognize that this is a big problem. I happen to think, because again, it goes back to the shame-based issue of sexual brokenness, that it's not something people are always comfortable with talking about, because so many people are personally struggling with it on some level, right? And when you see this inside the church, with something like 40 to 50% of pastors at one point were struggling themselves. You know, we're not seeing a lot of this, and I'm not just talking about pornography, just any kind of sexual brokenness. So it can look like anything. It can be abortion. It can be, you know, it can be all this gender stuff that's going on, and the, you know, same-sex attractions. It can look different. And I also believe that, or at least from what I've seen inside the church, they're oftentimes ill-equipped to counsel people. So it stays in the dark, and we know what stays in the dark, the enemy can just keep. It just gets worse and worse. Me Too movement. I think some of that is just ignorance. I just met with the editor of Vanity Fair, and I wanted to do a story about this because they're doing Me Too all the time. Which, you know, I can see Me Too. You know, I said, but look, we've got to make the connection between the kind of content that is saturated the internet, but not just the internet, other avenues. We just did a petition against about Teen Vogue. Teen Vogue had a safe anal sex guide for 12, 13, and 14-year-old boys and girls. Yeah. And we got 50,000 petitions. And they were encouraging young boys and girls to try it. And it's still out there. And guess what they did on Christmas Day this year? I don't have my slide up here. When we did this big petition, the editor, who was an LBGD, okay, yeah, you know what I'm talking about, kissed his boyfriend and shot us the finger. But on Christmas Day, they didn't say Merry Christmas to their, you know, tens of millions of teen readers. They ran a link to their safe anal sex guide. So the connection with Me Too just has not been made because I believe there's a lot of ignorance. But the good news is we have a lot of feminist groups involved in this effort now. And so that's good. We're all singing the same tune. All right. Oh, by the way, this is our resource center. Anything you need to know, we've got a whole clearinghouse of information. Okay, books, healing, etc., etc. And before we end, I want to introduce you guys to SaferNet because they've got a really cool technology. We don't normally endorse a technology, but they got a really kind of one-stop shop that I happen to love. Okay, next question. Yeah.
Wait for the microphone so people online can hear.
Yeah, like in the case of the president of Notre Dame, and when you go into these corporate offices and say, hey, will you filter? What's the biggest obstacle? What are they saying no to?
That's a good question. There is a lot of confusion about what is protected speech. That's why I start all these presentations with what is protected under the First Amendment and what is not. So sometimes it's just a matter of letting them know that a lot of the content that we're asking them to block and filter is not protected. The other is they consider themselves Ivy League, and they want their faculty and their students to have access to everything and to not have anything inadvertently blocked. And so what we try to tell them is that the technology is so good now that it doesn't overblock typically, but that faculty can have different access than students, and also they can unblock something if something is inadvertently blocked. So I don't know, Notre Dame is a little bit of a snobby thing, I think, actually, with them. The other colleges I have heard, even a seminary that I know the president of, have said it's a cost factor. But let me tell you how much it costs for Ohio Christian University, because we're working with them. They're filtering. For their entire university, which is much bigger than this one, it costs them an extra $15,000 a year to filter. That's it. It's inexpensive. And these companies that provide Wi-Fi, now remember, any place you go that has Wi-Fi, you've got a Wi-Fi provider. The biggest, I believe they're the biggest, I'm pretty sure they are, is Cisco. Cisco has all the filters. All they have to do is call Cisco and say, I want a filter. They will upcharge it, but they can filter whatever they want. They can filter hate speech, they can filter terrorist activity, they can filter racist speech, they can filter porn, child porn, lingerie, whatever. There, down this whole list of 2 or 3 dozen category contents, and they just flip them on, and it's done. So there's an ignorance factor, and when I talked to McDonald's, the head of McDonald's a few years ago, they said we hadn't really thought about it. So there's that other part of that issue is that they don't know what they don't know. So a lot of businesses will just decide to offer Wi-Fi. Why? Because they want you in their store. They want you in their restaurant. They want you in the lobby of their hotel, right? Using internet. So they're like, wow, this is a great added value benefit. And it is, except you get all the good and all the bad.
So does this new, Facebook came out and said that there's going to start filtering pictures. Is that a benefit? Is that helping us here? Or
Are you talking about encryption?
No, they said Facebook was going to start, there was going to be a delay when you upload your pictures because they were going to start scanning them. And it
That may have been, I'm not sure exactly what you're talking about, but that might have been the issue of scanning. Was it scanning for child pornography images?
Well, that was what it alluded to.
Yeah. Facebook's talked about a lot of things. They get kind of a bad rap. I mean, I've got a lot of issues with Facebook, but they also are doing more than a lot of the social media platforms. They get reported for more abuses of child pornography and pornography because they actually report it. some of the other platforms don't even report it. So and even Apple doesn't report it. So if you say, oh, there's nothing happening on that platform, it doesn't mean that there's nothing happening. It's that there's no reporting going on. So you kind of have to know how to read that. But I will tell you, one of the biggest concerns right now of the Department of Justice, there was a whole summit on it, is what they call end-to-end encryption. And now what Facebook and all of them are talking about doing is on Messenger, is encrypting all of that data from the sender to the end user. Now, this would be a disaster because it would be warrant proof. So in other words, if there's child pornography going through that message, if there's terrorist activity, right? If there's anything, law enforcement could not get at that information even with a warrant. So I just talked to Congresswoman, oh geez, I was just in 2 offices a couple weeks ago. I think it was Wagner's office. Yeah, it was Congresswoman Wagner's office who helped us with FOSTA in the House to try to write some legislation. And I said, I don't know how you're going to write legislation because these are independent businesses. So my suspicion of what the next wave of regulation might look like is that it's gotten so out of hand. Google and Facebook, their audiences are bigger than most nations. They are, okay? It's scary. And they're controlling a lot, including our lives. And what's going on, trust me, they know just about everything about you. And they, well, yes, hi, guys. I know, I'm talking about you right now. So they hear and they listen, they know our information. And so I believe that the next wave, is, if you will, is going to be kind of like what happened with monopolies. When all of a sudden the government realized, oh geez, some of these big companies have monopolies. So they had to come up with new laws to govern against and regulate against monopolies so that we could still have free enterprise. And I think we've gotten to that point now where the government's just kind of scratching their head and said, we've got to figure out how to deal with some of this stuff that's going on with these companies that are bigger than us. All right.
Can you comment on, yes, thanks. Can you please comment on the any attempts that are being made to regulate carriers, AT&T, Verizon, and so on, and filtering traffic there?
Well, I will tell you that the good news with carriers, now you're talking about phone carriers. So here's the good news. The phone carriers are used to regulation, right? Because there were dial-a-porn laws way back when we were dialing. Remember that? And they were used to being regulating and having some kind of government oversight over what they were doing. So what I have found in my experience is that these businesses that are the carriers, the now wireless carriers, are much less problematic with regulation than the companies that were birthed as a result of the internet, which would be the social media platforms and the Googles and of the world. Okay, now everything is merging with media. So Verizon and AT&T, they are content owners now. So there's a lot of talk about, I mean, for instance, movies are rated, right? You've got PG, RX, whatever. But yeah, sitting right next to it on a streaming platform, you can have Pornhub with live rape going on of a trafficked child. So how are we going to deal with that? Now, that's what I believe is, again, going to be this next round. If we cannot let law enforcement let the internet be treated any differently than any other medium. Okay, they can't get a free pass because they've gotten a free pass. And I don't think it's because they necessarily wanted to give them a free pass. It's just that the technology took off so fast and the bad guys just were so far out, you know, and once they get out in front of all this stuff, it's hard to catch up. So we're hoping with, I was just texting one of my friends who's right under bar at the Department of Justice yesterday to get a meeting with him in the next couple of weeks to try to get these obscenity laws enforced. And if you want to pray about something that could really shift the dynamic here, pray that we get that meeting and that this Attorney General will start prosecuting the obscenity laws. That would be a huge win. Because the pornographers know exactly what they're doing is illegal. They know it. And they care about the money. Remember, it's all about money with them. So if they believe that they're going to get prosecuted and shut down everything, they're going to listen. Okay, what else do we have?
I'm very glad I brought my family up in the late 60s and early 70s before all this high tech came in. I don't know if it's working. Somebody has to be accountable
Yes.
for these children's situations. How much, in your experience, do you put that at the door of parents or single parent families? How much blame do you put at their door?
I think it's hard to put blame. I believe that parents are the first line of defense for sure. But parents, now let me just back up. This generation of young parents are better at being cyber parents than the generation before them, because the generation before them didn't grow up with the technology like me. Okay, it came into being when we were like in our 30s, right? But this new generation of parents, like my stepchildren, they're in their 30s and early 40s. They all grew up with technology. For them, I think that there really is no excuse. They know what's out there. And here's this is a thing that still really just baffles me, is that Christian parents and grandparents are often the worst. Why? Because they think that my kid is a good kid. My kid loves Jesus. My kid's in youth group. My kid is smart. And I keep saying it's not about your kid. Who comes to kill, steal, and destroy? Right? The bad guys are using this technology, whether and it's pornography or the predators or whatever, and they are going after your kids. And if you are not vigilant, 24/7 on top of it, they can get through. The smartest, brightest kid that loves God the most can get hooked. And I always say, don't shame anybody. I've seen men that love the Lord and they get hooked on this stuff because it started when they were young. Girls who love the Lord and they get hooked, or their boyfriend introduces them or whatever, nobody is immune. So I would say that first of all. And it's very hard as a parent to keep on top of it all. And SaferNet, they're outside. I hope you will go meet with them. I really love this technology. I just met Wendy Stand Up and Jeff, her boss who created this technology, wherever he is. Jeff, his kid, Patrick, has a whole bunch of kids. And I will tell you, there aren't a lot. I always, first of all, this is my mantra when people ask me what to use. To go to the technology, the parental control tools with your wireless carrier or your Apple or whatever, and start there with filtering, monitoring. But then it's hard because then you got to do that with Xbox and you got to do that with every other technology. They have created this new technology, SaferNet, that works with all of this, I think, except for maybe gaming, and you're working on that next. It's coming. But the cool thing too that I haven't seen yet is once you get this set up on every device that your kids are using, you can actually you can allow certain apps and not other apps. You can allow certain platforms like Facebook or something and not other platforms, whereas most of the technologies there, you just have to shut off all social media altogether. You can't pick and choose. The other thing that I thought was really unique about SaferNet is that once you get it set up correctly, that child can take that device anywhere and they can't get on a virtual private network and onto a Wi-Fi network and circumvent the controls. So that I think is really cool. And they're based here in Denver, hello. So, meet with them. Okay, any other questions?
Maybe one more question? Go ahead.
Hi, thanks for talking about this difficult subject. We know that men and the demand for this is what's fueling a lot of this. And last year, a lot of people really went down. I mean, Jared from Subway is one that got in trouble. The other one is Jeffrey Epstein.
Mm-hmm.
And when he was killed or hung himself or whatever, we know that he had vast networks and tons and tons of people. So are you involved in that as well? It's like, hey, do you know, are in the know of how do these criminals get in trouble and go to jail and, you know, get punished for this? Because this is really, really disgusting.
Well, let me just say that that kind of sexual behavior knows no bounds. I always say you can't detect a disguised predator. That's another little mantra I want you to remember. They can be a wealthy football owner. Hello, Patriots. They can be, you know, multi-billionaires like Jeffrey Epstein and hanging out with presidents and princes. You know, they can be the sleazy guy hanging, you know, I mean, but they're oftentimes exactly who you don't think they would be. Because this is a secret thing that is done in and often, you know, in the shadows. And I do believe there's an old boys club. They protect each other. A lot of it started, I believe, you know, back in the Playboy era, where it kind of started there, and it's just continued to go on. And remember, all of this sexual content and acting out is also it escalates. So so I believe Jeffrey Epstein is the perfect example of someone who actually appealed to the rich and famous to provide trafficked girls, even though many of them were there, because they could have left, some of them. I mean, they weren't necessarily shackled or anything, but and maybe some of them, you know, were coerced, I believe, as I've heard. But you know, girls can sometimes get into this too because of the high life, and they get sort of sucked in that way. But we do know that there was a lot of these girls were definitely trafficked and coerced, didn't quite know what they were getting into, and then before they knew it, they were in, and they were in deep. So yeah, I mean, I know a lot of people who knew him actually, and I asked them, I mean, why didn't you say anything? They didn't. Yeah.
Speaking of visibility, did you talk to the Pope about this?
I did, yes. I'll go back to that slide. 2 years ago, there was a group of leaders, about 120 delegates, I was one of them, that met for a week in Rome. And we looked at all these issues that we've talked about tonight, and we came up with a global action plan. And these were people that are legislators in parliaments worldwide. They're law enforcement people. They're corporate people. They're people like Jill, you know, in the therapy world. They're in my world, in the prevention world, etc. And we developed a global action plan, and I think it is the best I've seen. And we're adding to it. It's an evolving document, and you can just go to oh shoot, I don't know what the web. I think it's just you can Google World Congress on Child Dignity and see that. And one of the things I actually got in that global call was that all Catholic churches, institutions, and schools worldwide would adopt a safe Wi-Fi policy. And I sent it to the president of Notre Dame. He still said no. So, you know, I talked to the Archbishop about it in Washington, and I'm going to see if I can't get a stronger letter from somebody more important than me. But, but anyhow, Pope Francis actually, when I did talk to him briefly, when I shook his hand there, I didn't talk to him about that because he had already signed this. But what I did say to him, I could just tell he was exhausted. He was shook like probably 200 hands before he got to my hand. And I just went up to him and I said, everybody was always chatting him up, right? You know, like, bless me, Father, can I kiss your ring and all. And I just said, I just want you to know I'm praying for you for strength and encouragement and wisdom. And he just lit up like a Christmas tree and started shaking my hand and said, thank you so much. And we started talking. And everybody's like, oh, wow, they made a connection. I went, no, I just actually offered to pray for him. How about them apples? You know, so many of these people that are in leadership, people are coming to them for something and not asking them what they need. And so that was my big conversation with Pope. All right, anybody else?
Well, on that note, let's close in prayer for Donna Rice Hughes, who's doing all this great work. Can we pray for you real quick?
Oh, sure, absolutely. And Jill here too. Just come stand up with me. She's out on the front lines, and you wouldn't believe the stuff she has to deal with.
Come on up
My
here,
dear
we're gonna pray
friend
for
and
you, too.
colleague who's on our board. Yes.
Lord, I am so very grateful for these strong, courageous women that are speaking your truth into our communities. Father, thank you that they are willing to take on these challenging topics that many of us look away. We sweep it under the rug and we pretend it doesn't exist, but they walk right into the lion's den. Father, I pray for tremendous success upon their work. I pray, Father, that tonight you give us eyes to see, ears to hear, and an open heart to go out there and make a difference in our community as a result of what we heard.